It's time for our Notre Dame football update with Tyler Horka, blueandgold.com beat reporter. Tyler, the big news coming out of Brian Kelly's presser yesterday is that All-American safety Kyle Hamilton is not going to be available. And that's not ideal because I think North Carolina's best skill player is Joshua Downs, and he's a slot receiver.
Yeah, he's a totally different threat than Drake London was for USC last week against Notre Dame. Drake London pretty much lines up exclusively on the outside, tested Notre Dame's cornerbacks quite a bit. We saw him go up and make some catches and make some guys miss. Josh Downs is a totally different player. He's going to be coming out of the slot. He's going to catch the ball a lot of times close to the line of scrimmage, but that's where he makes guys miss. So if he gets past the corner, next guy to try to tackle him for Notre Dame is going to be a safety. And without Kyle Hamilton back there, I mean, teams don't have guys like Kyle Hamilton patrolling the back end of their defenses very often. Brian Kelly said it in his press conference. He's kind of one of a kind. So to be missing a guy like that, a player like that who can make a difference is not great. But we saw DJ Brown come in and play 3 quarters for Kyle Hamilton against USC and tied for a team lead in tackles with 7. So that's pretty encouraging. And ironically, Kyle Hamilton got ejected against North Carolina last year for targeting, and who comes in, DJ Brown, to pair up with Houston Griffith. So those are going to be the 2 guys you see on the back end of Notre Dame's defense. They're going to have to do what they did last year and kind of stymie North Carolina's offense in the second half last year.
Yeah, Josh Downs is one of the nation's most dynamic catch and run players, no doubt about that. You also watched Mack Brown's press conference and his media availability this week. And I love listening to both him and Brian Kelly because I think they're 2 of the most candid coaches in college football. But Mack Brown had a lot to say about Notre Dame that I think Irish fans would find interesting. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, I mean, both of these guys have been around the block. Brian Kelly just turned 60 this week. Mack Brown is 70. They've coached at 2 of the most, storied college football programs in the country, Notre Dame, and obviously Mack Brown was at Texas for a while. So, yeah, Mack Brown's very candid. He flat out said that we would like to be where Notre Dame is. They're kind of the standard. He's trying to get North Carolina to a point where it's competing for college football playoffs, and Notre Dame has been to the last 2 of the last 3 college football playoffs. So that's the standard. That's what Mack Brown wants to turn North Carolina into. Obviously, they're sitting at 4-3, so they're a little behind the 8 ball on that right now. But to match up with your measuring stick, you have to beat your measuring stick, and North Carolina has a grand opportunity to kind of rewrite the narrative of this season. And that's another thing that Mack Brown was kind of candid about in speaking about. When the reporter asked him, what can a win for Notre Dame do for you guys? He said, well, it's not just Notre Dame. We have 3 ranked opponents on the in the next 3 weeks. They're also playing undefeated Wake Forest, a 1-loss Pitt team. So it was kind of striking when he was able to just speak freely about those games. They have the number 11 team in the country in Notre Dame next on their schedule, and he said, "Hey, look, we have a lot of tough teams remaining." It wasn't the cliche 1 game at a time thing. He was like, "If we lose all of these, then our season is kind of going down the tank." So. Yeah, like you said, very candid speaker, Mack Brown. He's been around the block.
But what should scare Notre Dame most about North Carolina? I mean, Sam Howell, quarterback, Joshua Downs at receiver. But what do you see as kind of their keys to maybe defeating Notre Dame?
Yeah, it's definitely not the defense that scares you if you're Notre Dame. I think what we've seen the last 2 weeks from the Notre Dame offense, they're going to be able to do against this North Carolina defense as well, which is efficient running game. Look, Notre Dame, I didn't think we'd be saying this 2 weeks ago, but Notre Dame has run for 170 yards or more in the last 2 games. So they're going to try to establish the running game. I think they're going to be fine offensively if Jack Cohn looks the way he did against USC. I know it wasn't prolific, but it worked, and that's what we wrote about at blueandgold.com. The other side of the ball, that's where it scares you for sure. Sam Howell, for all of North Carolina's struggles, has still been one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Ty Chandler is an excellent running back. He's been pretty effective as well. And then you've got a guy like Josh Downs, who we've talked about, who can catch a lot of balls and make plays when he gets those receptions. So outside of that, though, if you key in on those 3 guys, North Carolina doesn't have a lot of other options. And Mack Brown talked about that this week as well. They need to get the ball to their outside receivers. Those guys haven't made a lot of catches. Behind Downs, the next leading receiver is a tight end, and most of those catches have come in the red zone. So if Notre Dame plays really well defensively, 20-yard line to 20-yard line, they can kind of stymie this North Carolina offense, and I think that's going to be the key for the Fighting Irish.
Yeah, it's interesting. The same kind of question with USC exists here with North Carolina is if you take away their best receiver, who catches the ball for them.
Exactly.
And so
Not a lot
interesting.
of guys capable.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Not a lot of guys capable of doing that. Just go down the stat sheet. Like I said, if a tight end is your second leading receiver and he only has 16 catches for I think less than 200 yards,
Hmm.
you're not getting the ball to a lot of other people other than Josh Downs. So, and it's another one of those cases where Notre Dame might say, okay, we can let Josh Downs, make 10 catches for 100 plus yards as long as he doesn't bust a long one and get into the end zone, because it happened against USC. Drake London goes for 15 catches and 171 yards, and Notre Dame still limits USC to its lowest point total of the season.
Yep. You mentioned kind of disrupting the North Carolina offense. They rank 127th in the country in sacks allowed, and they rank 100th in tackles for loss allowed. So that deep Notre Dame defensive front could have the opportunity to kind of blow up North Carolina's game plan, unless North Carolina somehow in the bye week found a way to improve their play up front. So that's kind of my key. Is I think Notre Dame's defensive front is going to need to be the best unit for Notre Dame, and they're capable of doing that, I think. So what do you think about the night game? I mean, I think it's perfect to have another night game, because otherwise I'd be a little bit worried about a letdown after playing a rival. But I think everyone's going to be excited about seeing the light show again.
Yeah, hopefully they do the light show. I don't know how you do it one time. I know it was USC. It's a big rival. You want to make that game what it should be, on the national landscape, especially with all those recruits that were in town. And you guys did a good job of covering that. But yeah, it's at 7:30 again. North Carolina was a top 10 opponent at the beginning of the season, now unranked, obviously, but
Hmm.
this would still be a huge win. I mean, you've got to hype these games up if you're Notre Dame, because you look at the schedule, there's no ranked teams remaining. Maybe Virginia squeaks into that conversation by the time that game rolls around. But all of these games are huge for Notre Dame. This is a night game. I say do the light show, make it big. And yeah, it was awesome. That was my first night game at Notre Dame Stadium. And just as the sun was setting on the other side of the stadium, I was like, man, this is different than a 2:30 kick. This has a
Yeah.
different electricity. This is a different atmosphere. And it lived up to it for sure. It was really cool.
That's awesome. Well, I hope they. I mean, I agree with you. You have to do the light show now. You got to do it every
Yeah.
time. It'd be a letdown for whoever's in the stadium, and their night games are always big games and whatnot. So, but Tyler, have fun on Saturday night for your second night game in Notre Dame Stadium. I know you'll be working hard through the morning hours, getting all kinds of content available for everyone to read on blueandgold.com. So make sure you visit blueandgold.com for complete coverage of the Notre Dame North Carolina game. Thanks, everyone.